We've got NFL free agency right around the corner. I know everybody knows that the NFL is going to the combine next week, but the combine isn't really about the draft prospects. If you know, you know. The combine is about negotiating with free agents and tampering, and then getting the measurables and all that, and the medical reports and watching the players work out on the field. But this is a primer for draft season on the Dolphins In Depth podcast. And joining me now is my draft expert, Simon Clancy. Simon produces a draft guide that I look forward to annually. The 2025 draft guide will be available in early and mid-April. More than 400 player evaluations and breakdowns. If you'd like a copy, then you can email Simon at 2025draftbook@gmail.com or tweet him at Simon Clancy. And his Twitter account is right there. His draft guide is $12.50. And I guarantee you, if you are a draft head and you want to know the nitty-gritty about these players, it is worth it. Simon, I'm having you on. Everybody knows you're a big Dolphins fan. My condolences to you.
Yeah,
a lifetime of torture. But this is a very important offseason from this standpoint. They basically got 1 year to save everybody's job. 1 year, one season to save everybody's job. I'm very curious to see how desperate they act, how desperate the moves are that they make. I don't necessarily expect Chris Grier to do desperate things because that's just not his MO. But when I look at free agency, I always spend this period of time looking at free agency, what's there and available. And I don't really think there's much there and available. I think there's a lot of players who are going to be overpriced. And then comparing it to what's available in this draft. From your perspective, what are the stronger positions in this draft that you feel you might be able to get a good quality starter in round 3 and round 4? And that I asked that question because I think if you can go get a quality starter in round 3 and round 4, it's a quality spot in the draft.
Yeah, I think there's a few positions. Running back, I think it's an outstanding running back draft. There's some great depth there. Tight end, obviously a real position of need with Durham Smythe out the door, and just obviously Johnny Smith coming back. But the Dolphins need players there, and there's there's a good mix of kind of pass catchers. You and I talked the other day about Joshua Simon, the South Carolina kid. There's also some good blockers. There's a kid at Georgia Tech, Jackson Hawes, who I think will go on the third day, but he'll step in. I saw him up close in Dublin when Georgia Tech came and played Florida State, and I don't know if you can swear on this podcast, but he is an ass kicker he's essentially an extra offensive lineman. And you look at what the Bills.
Which guy is this?
His name is Jackson Hawes, Hawes. He is he's the best blocking tight end in the draft, and it's not even close. But he will come and he will bully you. You'll love him. He's a guy that you're going to absolutely love because he just plays bully ball. He's not going to catch an awful lot of passes. I'm just looking at my notes now. He's never had more than 15 catches. He's got 50 career catches in 5 seasons, never more than 15 in any one season. Doesn't have elite athletic traits. But if you're looking for a guy in the run game, just a monster who can essentially operate, in line as a 6th offensive lineman. The Bills did this all season long. They brought a 6th offensive lineman in almost all the time to play and were able to just move people off the ball and protect Josh Allen. And it was why James Cook was able to run so wild this season. He can handle ends 1v1. He can motion down as a move tight end, which is what McDaniel does. And that stems from Sean McVay's ability to have his receivers. You look at Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, they're always motioning back in line to take on edge rushers and chip them and help out there. And this is what Hawes can do. He can, he'll drop back in as a motion tight end, and he will eliminate first and second level defenders. And to me, this is a sort of a primary early day 3 target for the Dolphins, somebody who they really need. They really need a formidable blocking tight end. So Hawes would be a guy that I would look at. And then guard, the Dolphins need guards, but this is it's a good draft for guards, and I think you can get in the.
Or you think it's a good tackle convert to guard?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think it's a reducing down from tackle into guard. You look at some of the top tackles in this draft. Will Campbell, short arms, verified at 32 3/4. Kelvin Banks could easily move inside. You look at the Savanea kid from out west. You look at Armand Membao, a really good right tackle, but could easily reduce inside to guard. That there are the players there, as well as obviously, Wyatt Milam, West Virginia, a really good player who I think will be a really good, probably a Pro Bowl caliber left guard. And then you throw in your Tyler Bookers and your Donovan Jacksons, guys who've played there. Marcus Embo of Purdue, Tate Ratledge, the Georgia kid. There's some kids at LSU. Miles Fraser at LSU, I think you can get in the third round, who I think is a really, really good player. I'll be stunned if he doesn't go on day 2. But he is, his tape is full of pancakes. It's kind of snowplow clearing, run blocking, where he has good feet, combines good feet with athleticism and real power. And obviously, we know how much the Dolphins need guard play, and whether that comes in free agency. And there are some players in free agency. You look at
who you like in free agency. Because
I like Will Fries, the Indianapolis guard. I think he's a really good player. I like James Daniels if he's healthy. James Daniels was playing at a high level for Pittsburgh last season. Will Hernandez, I think,
he's paying $10 million for James Daniels.
If he can, it just depends on the medical, Omar. It just depends on how he is. He was injured, missed most of the season, but I think he's a good player. And I think he could really help the Dolphins if he was healthy. Whether or not you pay him $10 million, he's still young. He's multi-position versatility. He can play center if you need him to. He can play left and right side. So there's certainly some value there. But I think you go down in that guard list and you look at you go down to converted tackles like Jack Nelson of Wisconsin. He'll kick inside. There's a kid who you probably saw him at the Senior Bowl. People who watch the Senior Bowl practices. There's a kid at North Carolina called Willie Lampkin. He played at Coastal Carolina. He started 61 consecutive games at Coastal and then North Carolina. He was the Sun Belt Offensive Lineman of the Year in 2022, and then he went to North Carolina where he was a center, and then he went to North Carolina, and last season he won the award for the ACC's best offensive lineman. He was an elite right guard, and he went to the Senior Bowl. He is 5'11", 290 pounds. He would be the smallest, I think, pretty much the small. And you look at how small Aaron Brewer is.
Ooh, can't do it, Simon. Can't do it.
But here's the thing. Do you, and this is something that Jim Nagy and some scouts and some GMs were talking about at the Senior Bowl, do you convert him? He didn't allow a sack across 473 pass blocking reps in the ACC. He was PFF's highest graded guard amongst all offensive linemen. And he went to the Senior Bowl and he was dominant against big 330, 340 pound guys. He is mobile. He gets out to the second level. He destroys people at the second level. He understands leverage, but obviously he's 5'10", 5'11", 290 pounds. If he was 6'3", 310 pounds, he would be a lock first round pick. But the question is, do you move on from an Alec Ingold and save yourself some extra cap money and move a guy like Willie Lampkin, who is very athletic, to sort of a big power fullback, a bit like Baltimore do, with their great fullback. So I think, there are ways and means, and you have creative offensive mind like Mike McDaniel, who might look at a guy like this. And this was part of the conversation at the Senior Bowl. I talked to a number of evaluators there who said they were looking at Lampkin as somebody who could potentially be a sort of a move tight end / a move fullback who could just obliterate people in the run game.
Let me ask you about Miami's philosophy and approach. And especially with the offensive tackle. During Chris Grier's tenure, I think Solomon Kinley might be the only guard that he's ever drafted. Everybody is a tackle that they pretty much convert to guard. Do you believe that has hindered or helped them in this never-ending journey that they have to put together a respectable offensive line, which I think they did in 2023. You can't run for 2,000 yards without a respectable offensive line. But obviously last year with some interior issues, they need to refresh the interior spots.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a tackle is the right approach?
No, I just think good players is the right approach. And I just don't think they've ever drafted it. And you go back to that 2,000 yards. So much of that was down to what the offense was doing in the passing game as much as it was to the running game. Last year we saw why the running game was so bad. And yes, it was obviously because of that interior line play, especially the guards, but also it was because of the cloud coverage that defenses were playing over the top to not allow Hill and Waddle down the field. They were trying to condense everything, keep everything inside, not allow Miami to hit them over the top. You bring your
Yeah.
Feet, but then,
if you ran better, then they'd have to put the guy in the box.
That's the thing. So does that come down to the guard? Does that come because my frustration last year was running a 175-pound scat back through the A gap. Devon A-Chain's a really good player, but he's not a guy that you just want to plow through the A gap down after down after down. And I
don't disagree with you. And I also had more of an issue with him. He shouldn't be catching that many passes. I'm sorry. That's a lot of targets that are going away from Waddle and Tyreek. But
yeah, I'm just frustrated that I get that people were annoyed that Mostert fumbled on the first possession against Buffalo. We still had 7 possessions left in that game where we could have made a difference, and people sort of blamed him for that loss. But to me, Raheem Mostert was the best running back on the team to be able to run between the tackles. You had Jeff Wilson there, who proved the year before against Dallas when we needed a closer in that game to get us into the playoffs. Jeff Wilson came in that fourth quarter, and he was converting third downs to first downs. He was big pickups when we needed it most, when we were able to control the clock in that fourth quarter and pick up those key first downs driving down for that Jason Sanders winner. So in terms of your question, I think it's just to me it's just bad overall drafting in terms of the players that they've looked at, and I think Chris Grier's tenure in Miami, or at least most recent tenure, will always be haunted by what he said in that press conference about how we as fans and you guys as journalists value offensive linemen more than they do. And he chuckled and he sort of laughed in people's faces. And I think that's come back to absolutely haunt him. So the thing I think that they need to do, and which is why I do worry about them drafting a tackle at 13 and converting him to guard, is that that's not an easy conversion necessarily.
No, it's not.
They need
Now, it did work effectively with Laramie Tunsil. People forget that Rob Jones needed half a year to do it.
Yeah, but Larry is a borderline Hall of Fame player if he continues to play at the level that he's played at. You're talking about an absolutely elite player, whereas Rob Jones, with the greatest respect, is not that kind of guy. So I think what Grier and McDaniel need is a guy that's going to come in and perform like Chop Robinson and end up in the top 5 of your Rookie of the Year candidacy, because if they don't have that, then they will be looking for new jobs, because you cannot have an Eric Ezukanma, you cannot have a Smith, the corner they got from South Carolina, you cannot have a Channing Tindall. They have to have instant impact players, and not just at pick 13. They need 4 or 5 starters or 4 or 5 significant contributors from this draft class. And if they don't get that, then Grier and almost certainly McDaniel will be looking for new jobs, and it will be because, in large part, of their average drafting and their average ability to pick free agents up and not be able to go on the road in big games, in cold weather, in January, or when the games really matter towards the end of the season, and punch somebody in the face. And when was the last time the Dolphins did that? Jamie Nails days. I mean, there was a long time since.
Ooh, hold on, wait a minute. I'm sure they did it in the Richie Incognito days.
Yeah, maybe, but
yeah, they did it a long time ago. Yes,
few and far between. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Let me ask you a little bit. I hear so much talk about the defensive tackle depth in this draft. I have not particularly looked at that position. But would you compare this defensive tackle draft to the 2019 year, which was filled with a bunch of studs that are now making $20 million a year?
Yeah, there's some really good players here. I mean, there's some genuinely really good players. And I know we kind of say this every year about positions, but
nobody said that about defensive tackle last year.
But you know what generally happens? People are like, oh yeah, there's some great players, and then they kind of flatter to deceive. I genuinely think that there are some genuinely really good players here, and there's things for all people and things for all types. Whether Mason Graham is the top guy, he'll be the first DT off the board in my opinion. Kind of Michigan controlled explosion off the ball. He's able to, he's got balance, he's got strength, he's got power, he's got a great first step, he's got quick hands. He's he actually reminds me of Christian Wilkins. He's a very solid college football player who'll come in and just be impactful as an interior defensive lineman. But then you look at guys like Walter Nolan, in the 290s, but a phenomenal kind of disruptor. He doesn't have amazing vision, can't find the ball, but he's a guy that could just turn out to be, an all-pro, a consistent all-pro player. Kenneth Grant of Michigan, who played alongside. He's 342 pounds. He is.
I always have a problem, even though the Texas guys did pretty well last year. I always have a problem when 2 good defensive tackles are playing next to each other, because you're eating off one another.
Yeah, absolutely. But then there's the West Coast guy, Derek Harmon at Oregon, who was the Michigan State transfer, who's just got elite length, has shown absolutely dominant flashes as a pass rusher. He led all interior defensive linemen last year in the FBS with hurries with 39. I mean, he's just a gap shooting defensive tackle who, ended up with 5 sacks. He's got top 15, top 20 upside. But you go down the list, Joshua Farmer at Florida State, I think there's some sort of top 40 chatter about him. And then a couple of guys that's really stood out at the Senior Bowl, TJ Sanders of South Carolina, who moves so well for a 300-pounder. And then Darius Alexander of Toledo, who's kind of in the 290s, but just elite quickness. And then even then you go down to an Alfred Collins at Texas and Tyleik Williams at Ohio State and Aeneas Peebles, who played really well at the Senior Bowl at Virginia Tech, and on and on and on. Omar Norman Lott at Tennessee, who I know you've seen at the pre-draft camp that you've been at. So there are some really good players here, and the Dolphins obviously need somebody inside who they can pair with Zach Sealer. And I think there are guys in free agency, Bobby Brown at the Rams. I think the kid Tadero Slayton at Green Bay, I think that they will be kind of, under the radar guys that you can bring in and plug and play, multiple snaps per game. But what they really need is another penetrator who can take some pressure off Sealer, especially as Zach enters his kind of early 30s.
Let me ask you about Milton Williams, who plays for the Eagles. The Dolphins have had their eye on him for quite some time. What's the price point that you would put on him? I know you said I read your tweet during because he the whole defensive line 8, and I don't think he's definitely out of Philadelphia just because they've got horses there. How much do you pay him though?
He will get north of Christian Wilkins money.
No way! No way!
His season this year, he was absolutely outstanding this season. And the thing about Williams is, in the right scheme, and Philadelphia obviously had the right scheme, but you can line him up. He's got so much versatility in terms of where he plays. You can play him as a 7 technique, you can play him as a 5 technique, you can play him as a 3 technique. He's got strength. He's got.
You do realize Christian Wilkins is making $24 million.
Oh yeah, trust me. Milton Williams will be in that region.
Oh my God! I thought he'd be somewhere in the 14 range.
Oh, no way! He's so out of Miami's range as well. There is absolutely no chance Miami will get anywhere close to him. He is a disruptor on tape. He's got the strength to displace blockers at the point of attack, but he's got so much quickness to slip. That short area burst to slip inside. I'm
wondering because they've got anyway. I'm curious if they put the franchise tag on him. I didn't think he was that good. Not to say that I disagree with you.
And he's young as well, you see. I think he's only, I think he'll only be 24, 25 maybe. He's a young player whose best football, I think, is still ahead of him. So, and you look as well, you look at, you just talked there about defensive tackles working off each other. He has already supplanted Jordan Davis on that defensive line in terms of, first round pick out of Georgia. Jalen Carter is the guy that got all the, rightly so, he was phenomenal. But Milton Williams was right behind him. And they work so well off each other because Carter is that kind of, just that unbelievable leverage guy who's just got incredible quickness and power. And Williams has the ability to slip in and make use of those gaps that he's creating. But Carter's also, Carter isn't just doing it on his own. He was also able to take advantage of the stuff that Williams was doing. And you saw that in the Super Bowl, especially they absolutely abused that interior line. And, Milton Williams will get a lot of money, a lot more than I think people think he will get.
Woo, speaking about the guy who is probably going to get a lot of money, I hear, not that I believe, but I hear that Javon Holland is going to be one of the prize free agents in this class. I personally don't think the Dolphins are going to put the franchise tag on them because that's too exorbitant of a price for Jevon Holland, in my opinion. Where do you see Jevon Holland landing in the price point range for safeties, and would you make that investment?
Such a good question. I loved Holland coming out of Oregon. I loved what he was able to do. He played essentially 2.5 years as a slot, as a nickel. He really didn't play a lot of safety. And obviously sat out the COVID season, but 6 months prior to that, he played nickel. He played a year in nickel. I just loved him. I thought it was just such a great value pick. And I thought early on, to me, he just hasn't trained on, Omar. He just hasn't developed in the way that, and whether that's injuries or, I don't want to say, I would never want to say that somebody was making business decisions.
I think it's fair to say. Listen, here's the thing. I have no doubt in my mind he was making business decisions. When you break your hand in a season, then have a knee scope in a season, in a year that your organization decides that they're not going to pay you, and let you go to the market. And all I have to do is just get to the market, and I'm sitting at $50 million. I'm sorry, Simon. I'm making business decisions.
Yeah.
You would too.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to, look, these are guys that are going out and putting their bodies and their lives on the line to play this game. And I don't want to sit here and go, because Holland's clearly a tough guy. And he's, I thought he was a ascending potential all-pro player in the first couple of years. He was just disappointing. I think he's been disappointing for 18 since that interception on Black Friday against the Jets. I think he's struggled with injury. I know he was injured later on in that game, and I don't think he's ever really got back to the level where he was just flying around. I don't think he had a pick this year.
Even before that, even before the interception, I know he had 2 forced fumbles.
Yeah,
in an earlier game. I know he had the forced fumble. If I can name the games where you actually made a play, I can't name the games that Rashad Jones made a play. I can't remember. There are just so many. If I can literally pinpoint the games where you've actually made a play, I'm sorry, you're not that good.
Yeah.
And I think there's so much hype associated with that. And I hate for this to sound like hate speech. I just don't get, and I literally was talking to an evaluator over text who's going through the free agency, and he was talking about what he saw from Javon's film this year, and he was like, "Bro, he checked out." But I would say this: even before the injuries, he was just okay. Yeah. He was Chris Clemens-esque. In where were the plays?
Yeah, it felt like he was playing a little bit more off reputation than it was off actual, what he was putting on tape. And I agree with the evaluator. And I've seen some ridiculous numbers bandied about for him, between 60 and 80 million. I saw a Sports Illustrated. I know Sports Illustrated isn't what the reputation it used to have. But I mean, if somebody's paying 60 million for Javon Holland across 4 years, then they probably need to find an additional work, because stay in employment that long. I just find that really hard to get my head around. I think somebody else was talking about Xavier McKinney money, and McKinney was an all-pro, had a sensational year in Green Bay. That is not the player I see. I could see him ending up somewhere like the Giants in terms of replacing McKinney. I could see, ironically, I could probably see him end up in Philadelphia, because that system actually suits what he does. But I don't know what his relationship was like with Vic, and I can tell by the look on your face it probably wasn't amazing. But that team certainly suits his, because he really is a jack of all trades.
He didn't play like it suited him last year. I'm sorry, I cannot.
Weapon.
I could see him going with Flores.
Yeah, Minnesota, especially if they lose Cam Bynum, who actually I think would be really good in Miami, ironically. But if they lose Bynum with Harrison Smith getting to the end of his career, I could absolutely see him there with Flo. Absolutely.
I don't know what you've looked at in free agency, and I'm fine if Jevon Holland moves on. There are a couple of guys I have my eyes on in free agency, but let's talk about the safeties in this draft. I did my first mock draft this morning. I have Malachi Starks from Georgia as my 13th pick. That's primarily based on reputation. I don't scour the film until after free agency takes place, because let's say the Dolphins sign 2 free agents. Let's sign Justin Simmons and somebody else. And yes, I'm still a Justin Simmons fan. Not letting that go. Let's say the Dolphins add 2 safeties. Then they clearly don't need to address safety in the first round. So I'm not scouring film of a guy, or if they do defensive tackles. I'm not doing the depth of film work unless it's free agency. But how do you feel about Starks, and also the Nick Emanuel Wari from South Carolina?
Yeah, Emanuel Wari, South Carolina. I like Starks, although I don't think what I find quite interesting, and you and I tweeted back and forth over this, is that he came into this draft season, as it were. You get towards the back end of the regular season, back end of the college football season, as a kind of a top 15, top 20 player. But I think it's quite instructive that you look at some of the people around the league, some of the kind of the former evaluators who now work in the media. And I mentioned Daniel Jeremiah as one such person. Jeremiah, I think, had him at 33 or 36 in his big board. And just talking to a couple of people off the back of the Senior Bowl who I was in contact with, one in the AFC, one in the NFC, evaluators, who were saying that the consensus is that when you start to dig into the film with the coaches, is that, and that's what's happening at the moment, coaches coming off the back of the season now digging into free agent and draft tape.
Oh, hold on. Put a pin in it.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. I always pay attention to the rankings and the evaluations, and that's how I can kind of decipher who knows what they're talking about from who doesn't. Your top 50, top 100, your top 5 at each position should not drastically change 4 and 5 times. When were you right and when were you wrong?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, and I get it. When the real evaluators, the people who are coaching or the GMs are finally looking at these prospects, looking at the film, I get it. The medicals, the combine, the slow 40 times, I get it. Guys should fluctuate, but your entire list of safeties should not change from listing 1 to listing 6. And I think that that's part of the problem in that cottage industry of primarily draft media. Most people are pretending they know what they're doing and know what they're looking at, and then they wait for what the real evaluators say. Not to say that they're perfect or great at their jobs, because a lot of them are not. I'm particularly disturbed and troubled by the analytical movement in evaluation of players. The analytics is completely taken over to football, to the point where real true evaluators, people who have actually played the game, they're being pushed out for the accountants. Yeah. And that makes me very uncomfortable. But your ranking should not drastically change.
Yeah, and I, when people say, "Oh, he's rising up boards," and that to me, I think that's one of the biggest misnomers in the whole sort of media, Twitter sort of draft Nick evaluation stuff. I don't think players drastically move up boards at all. What I think happens is that we go through this time of year where scouts and personnel evaluators then meet up with head coaches and coaches, and they start to sit and go, okay, how is this guy going to fit in our team? Okay, so Nick Emanuel Wari will fit with here, but Malachi Starks will fit with here, or Malachi Moore at Alabama will go here, or Jonas Sanko, actually you've got him a bit lower, but actually he could play this position, and so forth. And I think that's what we're seeing, particularly with a guy like Jahdae Barron of Texas, who I think the Dolphins will have an absolutely huge circle around. Yeah, he won the Thorpe Award this year in terms of his play, and I think coming into this season, he was probably a day 2 pick. He won the Thorpe, but he won it. He played last season as a nickel, and then this season just gone, he proved that he could play outside. But what he does so well is that he reminds me of Brian Branch. And actually, I thought it was really interesting that Daniel Jeremiah said the same thing when he did his. So he has Barron as the number 9 player on his board. And I think that's hugely instructive, because that will be Daniel listening to people, talking to scouts that he's worked with at Cleveland and at Baltimore. And people will be saying to him, Barron, Barron, Barron. And what you get with Jahdae Barron is leadership. He's a team captain. He is a kind of culture tone setter, but he's a multi-positional weapon on the back end. He can play inside. He can play outside. He can play box safety. He can play overhang linebacker. He can play nickel linebacker. He can play robber. He can do all these things that a modern NFL secondary needs. And you look at somebody like Cooper DeJean, you look at somebody like Brian Branch, these players, you look at somebody like Kyle Hamilton, who Anthony Weaver knows really well. These players that can play multiple positions and do multiple things on the back end. Ironically, what we probably all thought Javon Holland might do when he first came into the league and hasn't done. But I think you look at the success of Branch in Detroit, and that's what you're looking at with a guy like Jahdae Barron. And to me, I think, when you're remaking this Dolphins secondary, as they're going to have to, Kendall Fuller's gone. So, I assume Kohu's going to play in the slot. If I was Miami, I'd be trying to do all I could to get Charvarius Ward as the free agent who can come in from the 49ers, and you can match him up on the outside with Ramsey and just have 2 absolute studs on the outside. And obviously you need to look at the safety position. But if you have a guy like Barron, he can just give you so many options. He can also cover so many sort of fault lines that you might have on that back end. So I think he's a really interesting and important player. Starks is similar, and I think what's happening with Starks and why you're sort of seeing him falling in inverted commas a little bit, is that the coaches are getting into that 2024 tape, and what you're seeing is not what you saw on tape before. He struggled a bit, and I look at somebody like Andrew McCuber, the Texas safety who was at Clemson, who had a significantly better year than Starks, and I think they'll probably end up in the same sort of area. McCuber is an absolute weapon coming down into the box and hitting people, and obviously you talked about the kid at South Carolina, Nick Emanuel Wari. Yeah, and look, this is kind of arguably the sort of number. If you're looking at the height, weight, speed kind of prospect, you might say that Emanuel Wari is the number 1 height, weight, speed prospect in the entire draft. He is a giant. He's like 6'3", he's 227, Some teams might move him to weak side linebacker, but what you gain from playing him on the second level, you lose by not having him at the third level, because he doesn't have perhaps the smooth hips and the amazing transition that you'll get from a Barron, for example, who's played nickel, who's played slot corner. But what you get is the length. You get, I remember going back, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 years ago and evaluating a less athletic 6'3", 231-pound safety coming out of Georgia Tech, who ended up winning a Super Bowl and being an All-Pro twice, in Cam Chancellor. And I think Emanuel Wari is a more athletic Cam Chancellor. And if you would say you could get a Cam Chancellor in the first round, then you're absolutely going to do it. You watch him man up in the slot against Ricky Pearsall at the Florida first round pick of the 49ers. He can cover. As a downhill run defender, he has got such a long stride because he's so long, because he's so big. He will close quickly. And at 231 pounds coming downhill into the box as a sort of hybrid defender, he is going to punch you in the mouth. And that's the sort of physicality that the Dolphins need. Now, whether or not he's the 13th pick in the draft, I don't necessarily see that. But, I also don't think there's probably more than about 12 legitimate, true first-round picks. And I think it's also quite instructive when you hear.
Really?
I think so. I think you talk to some of the evaluators and they're like, we probably only have 12 to 15 absolute nailed-on first-round picks. And I think what you'll find, certainly in the second half of the draft, is there'll be a lot of names that people aren't necessarily expecting, because teams will just have
their guys.
Yeah, it's such a mishmash in that second half. I think you could probably select anybody out of the top 40 or 50 on a, let's say, because we've mentioned him, Daniel Jeremiah, big board. You wouldn't be surprised that if number 43 ended up at pick 22, or if number, 50 ended up at 31. I just think that's the way it's going to go.
You know what? I hear what you're saying, and I haven't really gauged in terms of how the pros evaluate this draft, because I really wouldn't even pay that much attention, because all it takes is you finding 3 studs.
Yeah, 100%.
I'm sorry, there's 400 players in this draft process, if not more. I went to Bomberitos. I found myself 4 or 5 studs that I would invest in. I would want to see, and with the right investment and the right coaching, I'm pretty sure that they can have Jerome Baker-esque, if not better, careers. The good evaluators can do that. I'm not sure everybody is a good evaluator. And, that's not even factoring in medicals. But there's no way you could tell me there's 7 defensive tackles and about 8 offensive linemen that really have in the top 50 or first round grade, and then it's not be a good draft, especially with the running back there, especially with the wide receiver there. I did want to ask you a little bit about the quarterbacks and also what your approach would be. I have gone on record and I've said, I don't want Chris Grier spending any more draft picks on quarterbacks. He does not deserve that. That's my personal opinion. I don't want a GM who's on a 1-year prove-it deal and a coach who's on a 1-year prove-it deal selecting another quarterback, because let's say things do go wrong, the next GM head coach is going to come in here and they're going to want to pick their own quarterback. And then the next thing we have is we have another John Beck situation on our hand where that's not my quarterback. I picked my quarterback and I'm picking this guy. But I also can't tell you that I'm absolutely in love with the free agent options out there. I do have some guys that I want, but I don't think Jameis Winston fits this scheme. I don't think, I'm not trading a draft pick for Andy Dalton. How would you approach this draft, particularly at quarterback, because we know what Tua's issues are. We know we need a better veteran to go out there and win games. And I will make this point to you. I don't think a rookie added to this team, if asked to start 6 games, is going to win you 3 or 4 of those games. That's just my personal opinion. Where do you sit in that discussion?
This is a really interesting one. And I kind of want to throw it back to you first of all, because do you think, and Chris Grier obviously very well, do you think Chris Grier is picking for 1 year, or do you think Chris Grier is picking for, in his head, think he's picking for one season because the elephant in the room is that I got very nervous in that final game of the season when I saw Tua with sunglasses on. That to me is not a good sign of him in the sidelines with sunglasses on. That says to me that there are some issues still floating around in terms of possible concussion issues and hangover. I just do not think you're going to be on the sideline in December in New York.
I can't remember how bright it was, but I kind of
pretty overcast, and he had sunglasses on, and that to me was just a bit of a red flag. And I think the elephant in the room, if you're not planning for 1 year, has to be at what point do you contemplate, if he's on the board, Shedeur Sanders?
I was going to get you. I think he will be on the board. I don't think Cam Ward. I also wanted to get your opinion on Cam Ward because I'm seeing some there's no argument or discussion in my mind, and maybe that's because I've been overexposed to Cam Ward. He's got the dog. It's clearly there. I am a person who prefers. I want a team full of dogs, and if you want to start with the quarterback, sign me up. So I'm a Cam Ward should be the number one pick. If you don't do it, cool. Just like he said to AP, you're gonna regret it. He threatened the NFL, which I'm fine with. People will start second guessing it and talk about how he's a diva. That's his personality. They'll start comparing it to Josh Rosen. That's fine. If you want to compare Josh Rosen to Cam Ward, your mistake. You're bad. Yes, he threatened the NFL. Tough titty, said the kitty. But how do you compare him to Shedeur?
Yeah, I have Shedeur as number one.
You do?
Well, I have him as my bet. I think Shedeur is a better quarterback just because I think he's absolutely ready to pilot a pass-first NFL offense. And what he has that is impossible to teach is just the way that he attacks the defense vertically. I think he's extremely accurate. He's got elite accuracy, which is obviously why we talk about him with the Dolphins context. Now, I'm not saying Miami should, would, will, can draft him. I'm just saying that he would be a fit. He wants to get the ball out down the field as quickly and as efficiently as possible. He can move economically in the pocket and still, I had spoke to somebody yesterday who had a great line that, when he moves in the pocket, he still has that ability to uncall a throw like a boxer does with a big punch. And that accuracy is his elite trait. He puts the ball wherever he wants to do it. And he did so behind a really generally bad offensive line. Okay. Cam Ward, I really like. And what I love about Ward that he's done over the years is how much he's improved his consistency. He has the quickest release. He's the best functional mover in the pocket. He's got great second level accuracy. I love how he creates second chance throws by his movement in the pocket. I don't think he's a very good deep ball thrower. What I found really frustrating about him was that he comes off the midline far too quickly, i.e. the middle point of when you're dropping back, he drifts too much. And I find that it's obviously coachable.
You make plays that way in the NFL?
Absolutely. But I think he does it. So you go back and look at Russell Wilson, classic Russell Wilson when he played for Seattle. Russ is a great mover, great pocket manipulator, great runner, but he never ran unless he had to, even though he knew he could. And Russell stayed perfectly to the midline of because he was also aware of the fragility of his offensive line. And I think the thing that I found frustrating with Cam was that he drifted off the midline too much. I do think he's a very good player. I do think he's a natural thrower. I think all the kind of the improvised arm slot stuff is cool, and he had a lot of completions that showcased that kind of the various kind of, to take a golf analogy, kind of clubs he's got in his bag. What I also love about him is how he sort of plays the game with a low heart rate. He's very calm in big moments.
Poise.
And you say the dog, and he's got the dog. I just think, me personally, there's a bit more boom and bust with Cam, and I think yes, you have to worry in inverted commas about what comes with Shedeur and his dad and the stuff that comes with that, but also not forgetting that Dion is he's been there, he's done it, he's a Hall of Fame player, he knows what he's talking about. He understands Do I like the fact that he says he's going to go to this team and not to that team? And not really.
I'm fine with that. It's bad organizations in the NFL. I don't want if you're him and you're Deion Sanders and you're well aware and you know these people in the NFL, you know which teams you want your child to go into.
Yeah.
I'm fully in support. You're not talking about his safety son who's just lucky to get a job. No,
I think it's going to take a leap of faith for a general manager to embrace the kind of the inevitable probable circus that comes with it, knowing that NFL owners are
you're getting an NFL, you're getting a hovering dad.
Yeah, but owners are generally extremely conservative in their politics and their outlook on life. They're white, and the circus that comes with it is something that not all of them will necessarily embrace, and that's just a fact. But I think when push comes to shove, I think he's an excellent quarterback who's got nice upside in terms of the Dolphins and what they try and do in free agency.
Yeah. If you have Shedeur number 1, then let's say I'm assuming you think Shedeur is going to get selected. I think Shedeur could be there at 13. And if you say Shedeur, so if you think Shedeur is going to be there at 13, then you also think Cam's going to be there at 13?
No, I think Cam will go. I have them. Shedeur 1, Cam 2, but I think Cam will go above Shedeur just because of the smoke signals that you're hearing and how you're. It wouldn't surprise me if Cam went to Tennessee and if Shedeur went to the Giants at 3, for example. I know the Giants have spent an awful lot of time on the campus at Colorado talking to people about Shedeur. I know they were all over him.
It fits Dable. He is a quarterback that fits Dable. Absolutely. Let me ask you this question: if Cam or Shedeur are there at 13, do you pull the trigger?
Oh my God, such a tough. I'd need to know I would need to know, and you'd obviously hope that Chris Grier does. I would need to know all of the information about Tua in terms of where he is at physically, mentally, whether or not he's suffering from it, whether or not there were issues towards the end of the season in terms of.
So, are you scared of getting him competition? I'm a big believer. I don't care. Get a quarterback competition. If you're scared of competition, then you're not the right quarterback.
He's healthy. I think he's an outstanding quarterback who could take this team very far into the if he's healthy. But what happens if in week 2 of next season he gets another concussion? At what point does what happens if he ends up like he did in Cincinnati, where he's with a fencing pose on the field, or like he did
you're talking worst case scenario. I don't even want to think about that. I worry about the hip more than I actually worry about, because when we started the draft process in 2025, people that I know in the league were like, he's not on our draft board because we don't believe that hip is going to last more than 8 seasons.
Right.
And here we are. We have some mystery issue with the hip at the end of the season after of a hit from maybe the Houston Texans game that prevents you from playing with the season on the line. I worry more about the hip, and I'm a big believer in Tua. I'm a big advocate for Tua, but I am also a big believer in quarterback competition. And if you add Cam Ward to this team, I believe he would beat out Tua.
Yeah, he won't be there at 13. That's the thing, though.
Okay. But Shedeur, I do not believe that. And here's the reason why. They are very comparable quarterbacks. If you probably were to compare Shedeur to a quarterback in recent draft, it would probably be Tua. I don't think Shedeur has that arm to throw a 15-yard out. Now, Tua, I'm not going to say it because then Tua is going to get on me, but I've seen that throw from Tua. And if defenders know it's coming, they're sitting on it, and you don't want to know the results.
I think he's got the arm for it. Shedeur, I do. I think he's got above average arm talent. I think he is naturally accurate to all 3 levels of the field, which is what I think coaches and GMs and scouts will really love. And his vertical ball placement is better than every quarterback in the draft. I like to judge quarterbacks, Omar, on what they do on third down. I think that's really important. I think his third down numbers are excellent. And I think that is a really good way of trying to piece all these, puzzle pieces together. In terms of whether or not I would take him at 13, I would just need to know the biggest picture on Tua. I would have to, because I know we don't want to talk about the worst case scenario, but you can't not. It's unavoidable. If something happens to him, it's going
to happen in the next 3 years. So are you pulling the trigger or not?
Probably. But if I'm Chris Grier pulling the trigger, I know that that's my job. I may as well resign at that point because he, that. But it's true though. I'm not drafting him for 2025. I'm drafting him if something happens, and then I'm looking for an out on Tua's contract in 2026.
If you're Chris Grier, you know how you're operating this draft. My next job is going to evaluate me based on this class. That's how I should proceed. Yeah. If you're Chris Grier, but that's besides the point. Let me ask you about the second tier quarterbacks. Where are you with Dart and McCord?
Yeah, Dart. I mean, Dart is tough as old boots. He's got a lot of talent. He's got a decent arm. He's just really streaky. He's inconsistent. I don't think that offense is necessarily. It's a 7v7 offense. I think what happens is that you look at that system and it's just not set up to be it's a lot of scheme throws. It's a lot of ISO routes.
It's RPO.
Yeah, it's how translatable is that? I just I don't know.
Brian Flores ran a whole offense of it. So
yeah, but I think what's happening is that more teams are seeing there's just more tape of it now, and I think teams are able to do what they did to Miami last year in terms of look, how do we shut that offense down? Milroe's another look. I think Milroe is really, really interesting. Could you say to me that Jalen Milroe could end up in 4 years like Jalen Hurts? I don't think that's beyond the realms of possibility that he could be that player. He has got an absolutely monster arm, okay, and he is very, very mobile, but he's making half-field reads at this point. He's not. You take away his ability to run and
consistency.
Yeah, can he beat you from the pocket for 60 minutes? And the answer at the moment is no. You have to, in your evaluation of him, you have to say in 2, 3, 4 years.
I don't have that time. I don't have that time.
But he'll get over
the time. Kansas City could draft him.
Yeah, of course. But he has to develop as a technical passer, and I think he'll probably go in the second or third round. When realistically, he should have gone back to Alabama. But he maybe should go in the fourth or fifth round. But you can't. We know what scouts and GMs are like. He's dripping with tools. He has these amazing tools.
What was the Tennessee quarterback? I can't remember his name. Started last year, beat Miami. You know who I'm talking about.
Will Levis.
Will Levis. Yeah, so was Will Levis. And no, that's not who I compare. I compare Dart to I can't remember the kid's name. Denver. He was in Denver for quite a while. Just had all the tools. I think he played at Oregon. I can't remember.
What's his name? He went in the first round. Dallas almost took him, didn't they? And then he didn't. And
I think he went in the second round. But yeah,
not Paxton Lynch, was it?
Paxton Lynch. No, not Paxton Lynch. No. Let's move on. What's your opinion on McCord?
McCord, I quite like him. I think he's decisive, he's poised, he's accurate, more accurate than he ever was at Ohio State. He knows where to go with the ball. He's a very good fit for this offense, and I think that's intriguing. I think his ability to be decisive within the rhythm of an offense is pleasing. I think he's got. I think he's a bit inconsistent when you ask him to create outside of structure, and I think those are limiting factors against top defenses. But I think he's decisive and he's efficient as a pocket passer. The guy I think is really interesting is Tyler Shugg, the Louisville kid. I think he's older. He's had some injuries, but you put him in a Sean McVay, you put him in a Kevin O'Connell, you put him in a Mike McDaniel offense, he could be really good. He can throw it. He is big, he is mobile, he's mature. He has got, I think Louis Riddick said it the other day, he's got a lot of mental horsepower. I think he'll get drafted a lot higher than people expect him to. He might even go, I think he'll probably end up going the second day. So yeah, I think he could be a very intriguing guy that you could bring in. I just don't know whether or not Chris Grier can afford to spend a second day pick on a quarterback that probably isn't going to start, especially when you know that you need to go out and get yourself is it an Andy Dalton? Is it whoever it is they've got to find
Joshua Dobbs.
Josh Dobbs or Russell Wilson, whoever it is, Drew Lock, because
Russell Wilson ain't come here.
No, the bottom line is that if Miami had addressed that situation, what you're expecting from a backup quarterback is if your starter misses 6 games, if your backup can go 3-3, if you can go 500, you're okay. The Dolphins didn't do that, couldn't do that. Nope. There were games there for the winning. That Seattle game on the road.
They had the worst offense in the NFL when Tua was not out there. And
if they went 500, they're in the playoffs.
Yeah, no,
who would have started in the playoffs was a bigger question, because that would have been the second.
No, they would have been one and done. But yes, the top shelf of this team was a one and done. They just didn't, and I say this to you, Simon, when I'm in that locker room and the chemistry, the camaraderie, the communal experience, locker rooms, they take on their own dynamic, and you have to be in there to understand it. And that 2023 team, they had it. They had a bond, a cohesion. Now, when they started losing guys, they started losing games. But they had what it took to really, if they didn't get their face smacked by Baltimore and lose all their confidence, they could have made some noise. Last year's team, I don't think they ever had fun, ever.
So why? Because you were there. Why do you not? Because especially when you had you've got those kind of big personalities like a Calais Campbell, and you've got those kind of really respected vets like a Raheem Mostert. What was it?
The veteran leaders worked so hard to keep it all together and keep everybody confident. By the time they actually started winning games, they were emotionally spent. You never saw a touchdown celebration this year from this team. What did you see any deep pass the whole season? You didn't,
apart from the first game really against Jack.
No, that wasn't a deep pass. It
was caught short and then the long run. Yeah,
they were so out of sync, primarily from the run game, the struggles on the offensive line. I thought when Tua said at the beginning of the season, "Hey man, I don't need an offensive line. I get the ball out quick." He knew his offensive line was crap, and you cannot go into a season with that thought process, that mindset. A guy off the street who's the last free agent you sign shouldn't show up and be your captain week one of your team. There were so many different, and I love Calais Campbell. I knew he was going to do what he did, and I knew that they needed it. But you shouldn't put your team in a position like that where you're so poorly constructed that in the trenches, you're a disaster. On the offensive line, you're a disaster. And then think that, how I believe the game is won and lost in the trenches. And then in December, when injuries stack up, you think you're going to actually do anything?
Yeah, 100%.
100%. But anyway, that I spent all season last year writing articles and columns explaining why I think Chris Grier has done a very poor job putting the team together. I knew Ross was reading it with the hopes of him saying, "Okay, I didn't know that. Okay, this is if this team has a 33% chance of not having good draft picks, but just retaining their draft picks."
I'm stunned he got another season. I'm stunned that he got another season.
It doesn't stun me, because if you know Steve Ross, and I wrote a column about this, his worst experiences as an NFL owner has been the hiring processes.
Yeah.
Look at the last one. He lost a draft pick because of it.
And look at the knock-on effect it's had on the team, because they don't have those players that should be now at the
they would have screwed those draft picks up too.
Well, yeah.
They would have screwed them up. They would have traded them. I knew that I knew around midseason that Grier was not going anywhere. There was just a confidence and arrogance about him. He felt like he was safe. I get it. And you keep Mike McDaniel and you keep Chris Grier together because they work well together. They missed last year on building the team right. The team didn't have the right kind of chemistry. Maybe McDaniel took a misstep, empowering the players too much. So many things went wrong. The offensive line was trash. The defensive line was not good. They couldn't get any pressure on any quarterbacks. That, for whatever reason, Shaq Barrett retired, whatever reason, it was a poorly constructed team. The question is, can they do it over again and get it right this time? And I can honestly say, I think they can. A lot of things have to go right, but it has to start with the evaluation process. Can they put together a good draft? They've gotten Devon Achane. I'm trying to struggle to come up with other draft picks that they've had really good success with. And I'm not even a big Devon Achane fan. I think it's okay. It's all right. It shouldn't be a 250 carry back. That's just my personal opinion. Who you like in the backfield?
I mean, the other question when we talk about Shadur Sanders is if Ashton Genty's there, do you take him? Because he is as good as to me, pound for pound, he's the best player in the draft. I mean, I don't think there's a doubt about that. And, you can go back to Saquon, but I think you can go back to Adrian Peterson and say he's probably the best back since those two came out. What he does.
You put him in the Peterson category?
He's in that. I think he's in that conversation. I'm not necessarily saying he is that guy, but I think he's the best back since that guy, along with Saquon, to come out. I think what he does, his contact balance, and it is. I've rarely. It's Barry Sanders. This is a big claim. His contact balance reminds me of Barry. He doesn't remind me of Barry Sanders because Barry Sanders is one of, I wasn't old enough to see Jim Brown or Gale Sayers, but Walter Payton was still playing when I first started watching the game, and Payton and Barry Sanders, to me, are the two best running backs I've ever seen. But his contact balance reminds me of Barry Sanders, and I think if you can sort guards in free agency, let's say you bring in a Will Fries and a James Daniels, and you sort out, Austin Jackson comes back healthy, and you work out whether or not, let's say Patrick Paul starts or Armstead or whatever. But then you add a Genty to that, and that's going to take the top. That's going to open up the passing game for it. But what they need, in terms of the draft, you say, can they do it? Maybe they can. They need to do what Harry Roseman did with Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean and Jalix Hunt and Jeremiah Trotter and the year before with Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith and Tyler Steen, and they need the year before that with Jordan Davis and Cam Jurgens and Nakobe Dean and Grant Calcaterra, and the year before that with Devonta Smith.
They don't draft that well.
And then Dickerson and Kenneth Gainwell. And is that going to happen?
No,
I think it's pretty unlikely.
I think if it does happen, and I don't know where I propose this, that Chris Grier would have to relinquish his drafting power and give it to the second in command, who's very well respected, and the name escapes me right now.
Marvin Allen?
Yeah, Marvin Allen. Yeah. I don't think they all stack the board together. So the board is the board. I think when it comes to that time.
Don't they just need to completely just blow the whole thing up in terms of the front office? They can't keep handing the baton to somebody who's been there and has got the same ideas and the same. Don't they just need to?
No. I think you're right. They've never. I've been there 17 years. They've never completely blown it up. I'm not saying that that's going to be the answer or the immediate fix, but I'm just talking about this year. This year, I don't have. History says I don't have confidence in Chris Grier's ability to evaluate players.
100%.
So we are where we are. They'll probably purge the roster and spend about get to $30 million in cap space and buy themselves new players and then say they're going into the draft with everything addressed and we're just picking the best available player. That's what they're going to do because that's the Dolphins' way. Is it going to lead to success and team chemistry and wins? We shall see.
And look at it as well. Do they need a quarterback? Yes, they do. Do they need a running back? They probably could.
They need everything. They
need a receiver, 100%. Do they need tight ends? Yes. Offensive line? Yes.
I would argue that they don't need receiver because they still have Malik. Malik is going to be their slot, and then there's Taj Washington, and then you got Grant Dubose.
Yeah, I think we need one more guy. If you said to me, oh, the Dolphins came out of. Let's say we had the 13th pick and the 33rd pick, and we took Emeka Ibuka from Ohio State. I think if you had those three, you'd be like, okay, this passing game is. There's some good receivers in this draft, but do they need interior defensive line? Yes. Do they need edge rushers? Yes. Do they need another linebacker to go next to Brooks? Yes. Do they need corners? Yes. Do they need safeties? Completely. So they need everything.
They need tackle. Don't forget tackle, especially even if because Kendall Lamb is not coming back.
Yeah,
it's
and they're 18 million over the cap or whatever it is now after the.
They're like $5 million over the cap now. They'll shake down Armstead and probably.
What happens to Chubb? Is that another June 1st? What do you do then?
If you I'm writing a column now. If you release Armstead and release Chubb, you're at $35 million in caps. You're at $30 million in cap space. You could do and spend whatever you want. I don't know what is the right approach. I honestly can't tell you I know what is the right approach. But, when they did these early releases, they clearly preserved their June 1st cap cuts for a reason. And I think it's that $35 million that they'll save cutting Armstead.
There's only two they can do, isn't there? 2 June 1st. So.
Yeah, you only get 2. But Simon, I appreciate your time. You know I love talking draft. I hope everybody enjoyed this. Again, Simon does a really good draft guide. The 2025 draft book will be out. More than 4,000 players evaluated and broken down.
400. 4,000.
I'm sorry. But yeah, I'm sorry. 400. Yeah, 4,000 would be a little bit much.
That would be a little bit.
400. The book is going to be $12.50. You can get it on by tweeting him at Simon Clancy, or you can email to 2025 draftbook at gmail.com. I promise you, if you are really draft and want the nuts and bolts, it's worth it. Simon, I appreciate your time. Anything else you want to promote, Simon?
No, I'm all good. Thank you for your time. As always, nice to see you.
Always a pleasure. Enjoy. What's the weather like over there in London? Where are you?
Manchester. It's bright but cold, so same old, same old.
Yeah, it's hot and humid down here. But actually, we got a cold front. It's about 75.
Yeah,
the last days.
What a nightmare that must be.
All right, Simon.
How you cope.
Appreciate your time, man.
Appreciate you, Omar. Take care.